Imagine standing on the white cliffs overlooking the sea. The wind is strong. The waves crash against the rocks below. Now imagine looking at those same cliffs, not today, but 2,000 years ago. There are no cities, no famous castles, no Big Ben, no United Kingdom. Only forests stretching for miles, small villages surrounded by wooden fences, and warriors preparing to defend their land from an enemy arriving across the sea. They couldn't possibly know it, but the islands they called home would one day become the center of an empire that ruled nearly a quarter of the world. A place whose language would become the international language of business, science, aviation, entertainment, and communication. A country whose history would shape the modern world in ways few civilizations ever have. I'm Clara, and today I'd like to take you on an incredible journey through the history of Britain. But this isn't going to be a lesson where we simply memorize kings, queens, and dates. Instead, we're going to discover the story behind Britain's rise. We'll see how different peoples arrived on these islands, how each invasion transformed the country, how ancient tribes became kingdoms, how kingdoms became a nation, and how that nation eventually grew into one of the most powerful empires in human history. Along the way, you'll naturally improve your English listening skills, expand your historical vocabulary, and learn useful expressions while following a story that is full of battles, discoveries, ambition, survival, and remarkable people. We'll begin with Britain's earliest inhabitants and the mysterious Celtic tribes. Then we'll witness the arrival of the Romans, the fierce Viking invasions, the Norman Conquest that completely changed the English language and society, the rise of powerful kings and queens, the birth of Parliament, the Industrial Revolution, the expansion of the British Empire, and finally, how Britain became the modern country we know today. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand why the history of Britain is much more than the story of one country. It's the story of ideas, cultures, inventions, and decisions that influence the lives of millions of people across the world. So, let's travel back to a time before England even existed and discover where Britain's remarkable story truly began. Chapter number 1. Before England existed, the first people, the Celts, and Roman Britain. Long before Britain became famous around the world, before there were castles, before there were kings named Henry or queens named Elizabeth, before anyone spoke English, these islands were home to people whose names have largely been forgotten by history. Thousands of years ago, small groups of hunters and gatherers crossed into Britain, following animals and searching for food. At that time, Britain was still connected to mainland Europe by a huge area of land that is now beneath the North Sea. As the climate changed and sea levels rose, that land slowly disappeared, turning Britain into a group of islands. Life wasn't easy. People hunted deer and wild animals. They caught fish in rivers. They built simple homes using wood and stone. Every day was about survival. But over time, something remarkable happened. People stopped moving from place to place. They began farming. They grew crops, raised animals, built permanent villages, and slowly, communities became larger and more organized. One of the greatest mysteries from this period is Stonehenge. Even today, nobody knows exactly why it was built. Some historians believe it was connected to religion. Others think it was used to observe the movement of the sun and stars. Whatever its true purpose was, Stonehenge reminds us that these early people were far more intelligent and organized than we often imagine. Centuries later, another group arrived. The Celts. The Celts were not one single nation. They were many different tribes sharing similar languages and traditions. They were skilled farmers, talented metalworkers, and courageous warriors. Instead of one king ruling the entire island, each tribe had its own leaders and territories. The Celts believed deeply in nature. Forests, rivers, and hills were considered sacred. Their religious leaders, known as Druids, were highly respected. The Druids acted as teachers, judges, and spiritual guides. Interestingly, they rarely wrote their knowledge down. Instead, they passed it from generation to generation by memory. Because of this, much of their culture remains a mystery today. Then, in 55 BC, one of history's most famous generals arrived, Julius Caesar. At that time, Rome was becoming one of the greatest powers the world had ever seen. Caesar crossed the English Channel and entered Britain. His expeditions showed Rome that Britain was rich in resources, but he didn't stay long enough to conquer the island completely. Nearly 100 years later, everything changed. In AD 43, Emperor Claudius ordered a full-scale invasion. This time, the Romans came prepared. Thousands of highly trained soldiers landed in Britain. The Celtic tribes fought bravely, but the Roman army was disciplined, organized, and experienced. One by one, many tribes were defeated. The Romans gradually took control of much of southern Britain. But they didn't simply conquer the land, they transformed it. They built roads that connected towns across the country. Many of those roads influenced the routes of modern highways. They founded new cities. One of them was Londinium, the city we know today as London. They built impressive public baths, temples, markets, and theaters. Roman engineering completely changed daily life. Trade expanded, travel became easier, new goods arrived from different parts of the empire. The Romans also introduced their laws, architecture, and administration. For many people, life became more connected to the wider Roman world. However, not everyone accepted Roman rule. One of the most famous acts of resistance came from Queen Boudica. After the Romans treated her family brutally, she united several Celtic tribes and launched a massive rebellion. Her army destroyed Roman settlements and came close to driving the invaders out of Britain. But eventually, the Romans defeated her forces. Although Boudica lost the war, she became a lasting symbol of courage and resistance. Roman Britain lasted for nearly 4 centuries. During that time, Roman culture mixed with local traditions, creating a society unlike anything Britain had seen before. But no empire lasts forever. By the early 5th century, the Roman Empire was under enormous pressure from invasions and internal problems. Rome needed its soldiers elsewhere. Gradually, Roman troops left Britain. The cities remained. The roads remained. Many Roman buildings remained. But the protection of the empire disappeared, and without the Romans, Britain entered a new and uncertain age. New tribes from across the North Sea were already preparing to arrive. They would bring new kingdoms, a new language, and lay the foundations for what would eventually become England. Chapter Numerator 2: The Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, and the Birth of England. When the last Roman soldiers left Britain around AD 410, they didn't leave behind a strong government. They left behind uncertainty. Roman cities were still standing, the roads still connected towns, but the army that had protected Britain for centuries was gone. Suddenly, local communities had to defend themselves, and across the North Sea, new groups of people saw an opportunity. The Anglo-Saxons. The name Anglo-Saxons actually refers to several Germanic tribes, including the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. At first, some were invited to Britain as soldiers to help defend the island, but soon, many decided to stay. More people arrived. They settled on the land, built villages, started farms, and gradually took control of large parts of southern and eastern Britain. The Celtic people who had once ruled these regions were pushed westward into places such as Wales and Cornwall, while others moved north into what is now Scotland. Little by little, the culture of Britain began to change. The Anglo-Saxons spoke a Germanic language known today as Old English. If you heard it today, you probably wouldn't understand a single sentence. It sounded completely different from modern English. But many everyday words we still use today have their roots in Old English. Words like house, mother, father, bread, water, and friend all come from this early language. The Anglo-Saxons also divided the land into several kingdoms. Historians often call this period the Heptarchy, meaning the 7 kingdoms. These kingdoms included Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia, Essex, Sussex, and Kent. Sometimes they traded peacefully, but more often they fought each other for land and power. There was no single country called England yet. Instead, there were rival kingdoms, each ruled by its own king. Another important change happened during this period. Christianity returned to Britain. In AD 597, Pope Gregory the Great sent a monk named Augustine to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. Augustine arrived in Kent and successfully converted King Ethelbert. From there, Christianity spread across the kingdoms. Churches and monasteries were built. Schools began teaching reading and writing. Monks carefully copied books by hand, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have disappeared forever. Religion became an important part of daily life and helped unite different kingdoms through shared beliefs. But just as Britain was becoming more stable, a new danger appeared from the sea: the Vikings. The first recorded Viking raid on Britain took place in AD 793, when Norse warriors attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne. The attack shocked Europe. Monasteries were usually peaceful places, but the Vikings were searching for treasure, food, and valuable goods. At first, they came to raid. They arrived quickly in their famous longships, attacked coastal villages, took what they wanted, and disappeared before armies could respond. But over time, their goals changed. Instead of simply stealing, they began settling. Thousands of Vikings arrived from present-day Denmark and Norway. They established towns, farms, and communities across large parts of northern and eastern England. The area they controlled became known as the Danelaw, because Danish laws and customs were widely followed there. For the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, this was a serious threat. One kingdom after another fell to Viking armies. Eventually, only one major kingdom remained independent: Wessex. Its king was Alfred the Great. Alfred wasn't famous because he won every battle. In fact, he suffered several defeats. What made him extraordinary was his determination. He reorganized his army, built fortified towns, improved defenses, and even created a small navy to fight Viking ships. Most importantly, he united his people during one of the most difficult periods in British history. After years of conflict, Alfred successfully defended Wessex and negotiated peace with the Viking leader Guthrum. His victories prevented England from being completely conquered. Because of his leadership, Alfred became the only English king remembered with the title the Great. His descendants continued his work. Over the following generations, they slowly regained territory from the Vikings. The separate Anglo-Saxon kingdoms became increasingly united, and by the 10th century, for the first time, a single kingdom known as England began to emerge. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't always peaceful, but a new nation had been born. Yet England's challenges were far from over. In the year 1066, Another powerful army crossed the English Channel. Its victory would completely transform England's government, society, culture, and even the English language itself. Chapter number 3, 1066. The Norman Conquest that changed England forever. The year was 1066. If there's one date every British student remembers, it's this one. Because in that single year, England changed forever. Everything began when King Edward the Confessor died without leaving a clear heir to the throne. Suddenly, several powerful men claimed they had the right to become the next King of England. One of them was Harold Godwinson, the most powerful English nobleman. The English nobles supported him, and he was crowned king shortly after Edward's death. But not everyone accepted that decision. Across the English Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, believed Edward had promised him the throne years earlier. William was determined to take it by force if necessary. At the same time, another challenger appeared. Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, also believed he had a claim to England. King Harold suddenly faced two invasions at once. First, the Norwegian army landed in northern England. Harold marched his soldiers hundreds of kilometers and defeated them at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. It was an impressive victory, but there was little time to celebrate. Only days later, William and his Norman army landed on the southern coast of England. Harold immediately turned his exhausted army around and marched south again. The two armies finally met on October 14th, 1066, near the town of Hastings. The Battle of Hastings became one of the most famous battles in history. Harold's soldiers formed a strong defensive wall using their shields. For hours, they resisted the Norman attacks. Again and again, William's cavalry charged uphill. Again and again, the English held their position. The battle could have ended differently, but during the fighting, King Harold was killed. According to a famous tradition, he was struck in the eye by an arrow, although historians still debate exactly how he died. Without their king, the English army collapsed. William won the battle. A few months later, on Christmas Day 1066, he was crowned King of England. History remembers him as William the Conqueror. But winning the battle was only the beginning. William now faced the difficult task of controlling an entire country. He introduced enormous changes. The old Anglo-Saxon nobles lost much of their land. William gave large estates to his loyal Norman followers. This completely changed who owned England. To protect his new kingdom, William built castles across the country. Many of these were first made of wood and later rebuilt in stone. Castles became symbols of Norman power. They allowed soldiers to control important towns and quickly respond to rebellions. Some of Britain's most famous castles today began during this period. William also ordered one of the most remarkable surveys of the medieval world. In 1086, officials traveled across England, recording land, farms, villages, animals, and property owners. The result became known as the Domesday Book. It gave the king detailed information about his kingdom and helped him collect taxes more efficiently. No other European ruler possessed such detailed records at that time. But perhaps the greatest change wasn't military or political. It was linguistic. The Norman rulers spoke French. The common people continued speaking Old English. For nearly 3 centuries, 2 languages existed side by side. French became the language of kings, government, law, and the upper classes. English remained the language of ordinary people. Slowly, the 2 languages mixed together. Thousands of French words entered English, words such as government, justice, court, prison, army, beauty, fashion, and language all came from Norman French. This is one reason modern English has such a large vocabulary. It combines its Anglo-Saxon roots with thousands of French and Latin words. The Norman Conquest didn't simply replace one king with another. It reshaped England's government, society, architecture, culture, and language. Many historians consider it one of the most important turning points in British history. But England was still developing. Over the centuries that followed, powerful kings would fight with their own nobles, Parliament would slowly gain influence, and the monarchy itself would begin changing forever. The foundation of modern Britain was only beginning to take shape. Chapter number 4: Kings, Parliament, and the Rise of Britain as a World Power. After the Norman Conquest, England became stronger and more organized, but that didn't mean life became peaceful. For centuries, kings fought to expand their power, while nobles demanded greater rights. One of the most important moments came in the year 1215. King John had become deeply unpopular. He raised heavy taxes, lost important wars, and angered many powerful nobles. Eventually, they forced him to sign a document called the Magna Carta. At first, it was meant to solve a political conflict, but over time, it became one of the most influential documents in history. Its central idea was revolutionary. Even the king was not above the law. Today, many democratic countries still see the Magna Carta as an early step toward the rule of law and individual rights. Over the following centuries, another important institution became stronger: Parliament. Originally, kings called meetings with nobles and religious leaders when they needed advice or money. Gradually, these meetings developed into a parliament that represented different parts of society. Although the king remained powerful, Parliament slowly gained greater influence over taxes and government decisions. This balance between monarchy and Parliament would become one of Britain's defining characteristics. Then came the Tudor period, one of the most famous eras in British history. The most well-known Tudor king was Henry VIII. He is remembered for his 6 marriages, but his greatest historical impact was political and religious. When the Pope refused to approve the end of one of his marriages, Henry made a dramatic decision. He separated England from the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and established the Church of England, with the king as its supreme head. This decision permanently changed English religion and politics. After Henry came one of Britain's greatest monarchs, Queen Elizabeth I. Her reign became known as the Elizabethan Age. It was a time of exploration, trade, literature, and growing national confidence. William Shakespeare wrote many of his greatest plays during this period, helping shape English literature forever. In 1588, England faced one of its greatest military threats when Spain sent the powerful Spanish Armada to invade. Against the odds, the English Navy defeated the invasion fleet. The victory strengthened England's position in Europe and became a symbol of national pride. Over the next 2 centuries, Britain continued expanding its influence. Its navy became one of the strongest in the world. British merchants established trading networks across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. At the same time, scientists, inventors, and entrepreneurs transformed the economy. Then, in the 18th century, another revolution began. Not a political revolution, but an industrial one. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain. New inventions, such as the steam engine, changed manufacturing forever. Factories replaced many traditional workshops. Railways connected cities. Coal and iron powered enormous industries. Millions of people moved from villages into growing industrial towns. Britain became known as the workshop of the world. Its factories produced textiles, machines, and countless other products that were exported across the globe. As Britain's economy grew, so did its empire. During the 19th century, the British Empire expanded across every inhabited continent. At its greatest extent, it ruled nearly a quarter of the world's land and population. People often said, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," because somewhere in the empire, it was always daytime. This expansion spread British laws, institutions, and especially the English language around the world. But empire also brought conflict, inequality, and colonial rule, leaving a complex legacy that historians continue to debate today. By the beginning of the 20th century, Britain had become one of the world's leading powers. Yet two devastating world wars would soon transform both Britain and the global balance of power forever. Chapter number 5. Modern Britain, World Wars, the End of the Empire, and Britain's Place in Today's World. At the beginning of the 20th century, Britain was one of the most powerful nations on Earth. Its empire stretched across continents. Its navy controlled important sea routes. Its industries supplied goods to much of the world. Many people believed Britain's power would continue growing forever. But history had other plans. In 1914, Europe was pulled into the First World War. Britain entered the conflict after Germany invaded Belgium, honoring its treaty to defend Belgian neutrality. What many expected to be a short war became 4 years of destruction. Millions of soldiers fought in muddy trenches across Europe. New weapons, including machine guns, tanks, and poison gas, made the fighting more deadly than ever before. When the war finally ended in 1918, Britain was on the winning side, but victory came at an enormous cost. Almost every community had lost fathers, sons, brothers, or friends. The country celebrated peace while mourning an entire generation. Only 21 years later, another even greater conflict began, the Second World War. In 1939, Britain declared war on Nazi Germany after the invasion of Poland. For a time, Britain stood almost alone against Hitler's growing power. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, German aircraft bombed British cities for months. London suffered heavy damage during a period known as the Blitz. Homes, schools, factories, and historic buildings were destroyed. Yet, despite the bombing, the British people refused to surrender. Their determination became one of the defining moments of the war. With the support of Allied nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, Germany was eventually defeated in 1945. Although Britain emerged victorious again, the country had changed forever. The war had exhausted its economy. Maintaining a global empire became increasingly difficult. During the decades that followed, many British colonies gained independence. India, often called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, became independent in 1947. Many nations across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean soon followed. Gradually, the British Empire gave way to the Commonwealth, a voluntary association of independent countries that continue to cooperate in areas such as education, trade, culture, and sport. Meanwhile, Britain continued changing at home. The National Health Service, known as the NHS, was established in 1948, providing healthcare that became free at the point of use for everyone. Immigration from many parts of the former empire transformed British society, making modern Britain one of the world's most multicultural nations. Today, Britain remains a constitutional monarchy. The monarch serves as the head of state, while the Prime Minister leads the government. Its universities, scientific research, literature, music, business, and cultural influence continue to reach people across the globe. Perhaps Britain's greatest modern contribution is something we use every day: the English language. What began as the language of Anglo-Saxon settlers, later shaped by Vikings, Normans, and centuries of history, has become the world's most widely used international language. It connects millions of people from different cultures every single day. And that's why Britain's story is far more than the history of one nation. It's the story of migrations, invasions, ideas, discoveries, conflicts, and remarkable people whose decisions helped shape the modern world. From ancient Celtic tribes to Roman roads, from Viking ships to Norman castles, from medieval kings to the Industrial Revolution, from a global empire to today's modern democracy, Britain has constantly reinvented itself. Its history reminds us that no nation is built in a single generation. Every era leaves its mark, every challenge creates change, and every generation writes another chapter. The story of Britain is still being written today, and like all great histories, it continues to evolve with every passing year.